Susie and Jack, a young couple seeking an escape from their monotonous daily lives, had the idea of taking a spontaneous drive through the countryside. It had been a while since they had ventured out of the city, and they were eager to find something new, something exciting, to spice up their weekend. Jack had recently bought a new car, and the open road was calling to him. As they cruised along, Susie noticed the sky changing color, a dark shade of crimson that heralded the impending twilight. They had been driving for hours when they came across a rusted, almost hidden signpost that read, Hollowbrook Cemetery, established 1832. It was old, worn, and faint, as if it had been there for decades. Susie, intrigued by the name, suggested they stop for a quick visit. Jack, always up for an adventure, agreed. After all, they were in the middle of nowhere, and what could possibly go wrong? The cemetery was located at the end of a long, winding path, surrounded by overgrown trees that seemed to close in on them as they drove. The cemetery itself looked abandoned. Its stone gate was cracked, the bars rusted and twisted. As they entered the grounds, the temperature seemed to drop sharply. The air was thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of decay. The stones, once elegant, were now crooked and covered in moss. Many of the gravestones had long since weathered away, their inscriptions illegible. As they ventured deeper into the cemetery, they noticed strange symbols carved into some of the remaining gravestones, symbols that seemed older than the cemetery itself. Some appeared to be in a language they didn't recognize, while others resembled warnings of some kind. The unsettling feeling in Susie's stomach intensified. She suggested they leave, but Jack, ever the curious one, insisted they continue exploring. They reached the farthest corner of the cemetery, where a dilapidated mausoleum stood. The stones around it were scorched and blackened, as though they had been subjected to fire. Jack went to investigate, but Susie remained at the entrance, looking around nervously. The wind had begun to pick up, rustling the dead leaves around them. Then Susie felt it, a subtle heat, almost like a flicker of fire in the air. Suddenly, Jack turned to her, his face frozen in terror. Before he could speak, the ground beneath them trembled. The earth seemed to crack open, revealing red-hot flames emerging from the soil itself. The heat was unbearable, and Susie felt herself being pulled toward the inferno. The flames licked at her skin, and her heart raced with panic. Jack reached out to grab her, but it was too late. A burst of fire engulfed him, and he was gone in an instant. Susie tried to scream, but the flames were all around her now, pushing her backward, dragging her toward the ground. Her skin burned, her vision blurred, and the air around her became thick with smoke. She tried to run, but the heat was too intense. The entire cemetery seemed to be burning, the fire growing stronger with each passing second. As Susie's body crumpled to the ground, the last thing she saw was the cemetery itself. The entire land consumed by fire, the spirits of those buried here crying out in agony. In their attempt to escape the flames, they had unknowingly walked into the heart of an ancient curse. The village that had once lived here had been burned to the ground by a rival village centuries ago, and the spirits of the dead had never found peace. The cemetery was a trap, a place where the flames of the past never died. Now, it had claimed their lives, just as it had claimed so many others before them. The next morning, the police discovered their car parked near the cemetery, but there was no sign of Susie or Jack. As investigators searched the area, they found charred remains scattered around the cemetery grounds. The local elder, an old man who had lived in the area for decades, revealed the truth about the cemetery. It was a place where the souls of the burnt villagers lingered, never able to find rest. The flames were their curse, an eternal fire that would burn anyone foolish enough to enter the grounds. It wasn't long before the authorities began to receive more reports of people vanishing near the cemetery. Hollowbrook Cemetery became a place of terror, avoided by the locals who knew its dark history. And while Susie and Jack's tragic fate was just another tale to add to the cemetery's long list of victims, their story would continue to haunt the village. Every year, on the anniversary of the fire, the cemetery would burn again, claiming new souls and adding to the endless cycle of suffering. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway for a group of cousins, Daniel, Lena, Mark, and Julie. They had rented a large rustic house on the outskirts of town, a perfect place to have a barbecue and spend some time together. The house, known as Hollow Manor, was an old estate that had been abandoned for years, but when they arrived, it seemed strangely inviting. It had a large backyard, a stone fireplace, and plenty of space to relax. They arrived just before sunset, and as they unloaded their supplies, they marveled at the old stonework and the way the manor seemed to have a personality all its own. It was secluded, surrounded by dense woods, but there was an undeniable charm to it. No one mentioned the rumors they had heard about the house. They were here to have fun, not to be spooked by local legends. As the sun set and night began to fall, the cousins gathered around the fire pit in the backyard, cooking meat and enjoying each other's company. The night air was cool, but there was an odd stillness to it. No crickets chirped, no wind rustled the leaves, just an unnatural silence that hung in the air like a heavy fog. Around midnight, the fire in the pit flickered and sputtered out, much to their surprise. Mark tried to relight it, but the lighter wouldn't work. They joked about it, thinking it was just some technical glitch. But then an eerie sound echoed from within the house, a low dragging noise like something heavy being moved across the floor. Julie, curious, suggested they investigate, but Lena, ever the cautious one, didn't want to leave the warmth of the fire. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to shake. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the lights inside the house flickered. Mark looked around, confused and alarmed. Something wasn't right. Then the house doors burst open by themselves, and the cousins stood frozen, staring at the silhouette of the large, looming mansion. They ventured inside, and the first thing they noticed was the musty air. Dust had settled everywhere, and the house seemed abandoned for much longer than they had thought. As they moved deeper into the manor, they stumbled upon an old portrait hanging on the wall. A beautiful couple, their faces frozen in time. But their eyes were scratched out, as though someone had deliberately tried to erase them from history. The image gave them a chill. Then came the whispers, soft, indistinct voices, like murmurs coming from the shadows. But when they turned to look, there was nothing there. As they moved further through the house, the temperature dropped suddenly, and the whispers grew louder, more distinct. The house creaked and groaned as though it were alive. The cousins tried to leave, but the front door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Panic set in. The house felt alive, as if it were trying to trap them, and every turn seemed to lead them deeper into its dark corridors. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heavy. But when they rushed to investigate, there was no one there. The terror escalated when they discovered a blood-stained room in the upper level. It was a nursery, its walls covered with claw marks and scratches, as though someone had been trying to escape. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the room was unnaturally cold. As the night dragged on, it became clear that the house was not empty. It was haunted by the souls of a couple who had been brutally murdered by a group of dacoits years ago. Their violent deaths had left the house forever cursed. The spirits of the couple were trapped, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to set foot in the manor. As the night wore on, one by one, the cousins vanished, disappearing into thin air, never to be seen again. Weeks later, the police arrived at Hollow Manor to investigate reports of missing persons. They found only the remnants of the barbecue, scattered and abandoned. no trace of the cousins was ever found. The local legend about Hollow Manor was more than just a story. It was a warning. No one left the manor alive. It would continue to claim victims as long as its blood-stained walls stood. On New Year's Eve, 4 friends, Tom, Carla, Ben, and Sarah, left an extravagant lodge deep in the forest, exhilarated from the ball. But their laughter turned to unease when a wrong turn plunged them into the dense, endless woods. The ancient trees loomed like silent sentinels, the air heavy with fog and an unnatural chill. Paths disappeared into shadowy nothingness, and panic set in as they realized they were lost. Their attempts to retrace their steps only led them deeper. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of snow underfoot, until faint echoing footsteps seemed to follow. Turning sharply, they found nothing but darkness. Shadows danced at the edge of their vision, fleeting yet persistent. The forest, vast and unknowable, seemed alive, its intent malevolent. Crossing a rotting wooden bridge, Sarah slipped as the planks groaned violently beneath her. Ben caught her in time, but the group's nerves were unraveling. The woods felt tighter now, suffocating, as if the trees themselves were closing in. Cold whispers began to seep from the darkness, indistinct and low, winding around them like a chilling wind. The forest grew stranger with each step. Shapes flickered in the corners of their eyes, shifting and distorting before vanishing. An abandoned stone structure loomed ahead, its decayed walls casting ghostly silhouettes. Something moved inside, scraping, shuffling, but Carla begged them to keep going. Reluctantly, they left, the weight of unseen eyes trailing them. Paths looped endlessly, the forest a labyrinth with no escape. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of scorched earth, and the whispers intensified. They stumbled into a clearing, and the scene stole their breath. Broken cannons, shattered swords, and fragments of armor littered the ground, a battlefield scarred by violence. Blackened, gnarled trees encircled the space, their twisted forms looming like mourners. The whispers grew into an anguished chorus, accusing and vengeful. A sudden wind howled through the clearing, toppling them. The forest seemed to breathe, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The trees swayed violently, their limbs reaching as if to ensnare them. Darkness deepened and the air crackled with an otherworldly tension. The clearing transformed into a nightmare. The remnants of the battle came alive in their minds. A massacre. Comrades turning on each other in a frenzy of betrayal. The ground beneath them groaned and cracked as if wounded, and an overwhelming sense of despair consumed them. The whispers demanded retribution, their disembodied voices rising into a cacophony. The forest refused to let them leave. The shadows tightened, the wind tore at their bodies, and the earth opened beneath their feet. The group's screams were swallowed by the cursed soil, their bodies dragged into the cold, unyielding ground. The woods fell silent once more. Days later, search parties found only scattered scraps of clothing in the clearing. The locals whispered of the restless soldiers, forever haunting the forest, and the curse that consumed anyone who dared enter. The woods kept their secrets, and the lost remained trapped, their voices joining the mournful whispers that haunted the ancient trees.